Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today we have back on the show podcast regular, human trafficking, torture, satanic ritual abuse, and mind control survivor and whistleblower, anti-child abuse advocate, podcast host of Unbroken, entrepreneur and founder of Unbroken.Global and the Unbroken Summit, speaker, author, and someone I'm honored to call a dear friend, Max Lowen. A little bit of background information about Max if this is your first time tuning in or meeting her. She was born into a multi-generational incest-based family and was the daughter of diplomatic parents. Her abuse began at birth with the Italian side of her family, where her uncle ran a secret underground facility in Rome with underground tunnels that connected to the Vatican. It was through these very tunnels that Max would be taken to the Vatican, where she would bear witness to and be forced to endure horrific and heinous abuse and behavior modification programs as a child. And through the diplomatic connections of her parents, she would also be subjected to child trafficking, satanic ritual abuse, torture, and mind control at the hands of Italian and European elite. If you missed Max's incredible testimonial episode we did together, I'll have it linked below in the show notes for all of you, along with 2 other guest panel episodes Max was a part of on the show, including our promotional episode for the 50 Voices of Ritual Abuse Project, as well as our Psychic and Spiritual Gifts panel episode. Today, Max is back, and this time it's to talk about an important topic that is very quickly becoming one of the most requested topics on this podcast, which is healing and recovery from trauma. The first step for all of us in society when it comes to healing, especially for survivors of extreme trauma, is to recognize and identify all the ways we've been lied to, manipulated, programmed, and abused. And after that, the absolute most important piece of the puzzle is learning how to heal from it all. And one only has to listen to Max speak for 30 seconds before taking in the depth of healing she has gone through to endure and survive the horrendous abuses perpetuated against her as a child to become the unbroken and unbreakable woman and warrior she is today standing before us. Max is a living example of what is on the other side of healing from trauma and how, as a society, we can move from generational trauma to generational healing. Max has an incredible presentation prepared for us today, and I ask you all to give her your full attention and grab a pen and paper as we are all going to learn some new tools to add to our healing and recovery toolbox. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a quick couple of reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast as a guest or share any information privately with me, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. You can also use this email if you'd like to be a part of my new book series featuring written survivor testimonies, and you can find the video with all the details on how to submit your testimony on any of my podcast channels. And lastly, I'd love your support on Substack, where I've taken up investigative journalism as an outlet for me to share about the podcast, podcast guests, and advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me there at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All my links are in the show notes, and I love your support across all platforms, you guys. Thank you so much for caring so deeply about survivors and whistleblowers, and for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor and whistleblower disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, survivor, thriver, voice for the voiceless, anti-child abuse advocate, and fearless and unbroken truth warrior, the one, the only, Max Lowen. Max, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. Your introductions are amazing. Feel like royalty right now.
You are royalty. You should always be treated that way, and you always should have been. It's all true, and I could have written, a book that would take somebody a whole year to read about how amazing you are. And I'm really excited to have you back. You've kind of become a regular. You've been on a few times now, and your testimony episode was incredible. So, for people listening, this episode won't be focused on Max's testimony. She's going to share pieces of her story, but I will have that in the show notes. I encourage you all to go listen to it and to also go support her on her website, where she also does a podcast called Unbroken. And she does some episodes there too, where she shares about herself and she interviews other survivors. So I want you guys to please go check that out when you can. But today we're going to focus on a really, really important topic. I've realized so much. It's not that I didn't realize healing and recovery is important, but when you look at trauma and just how broken the world is, I've had to take a step back and be like, whoa, like I thought I knew what healing was and I don't. I thought I knew like how trauma affected me and I don't. And so I think for all of us, like the biggest thing and the biggest piece of this is relearning how our bodies work and then relearning how to mend ourselves. And I'm so grateful for people like you who are out there pioneering the education piece for us to get from where we are to where we could be. And I'm super excited for this presentation today. So I'm going to hand it off to you. I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit about the presentation, what inspired you to create it, maybe an overview, and then let's get into it. And I'll let you lead.
Sure. Yeah, as you said in the introduction, I've the first 18 years of my life were pretty brutal, the things that I survived and saw. And but what I would say is I've noticed as I got older that my individual journey is also all of our collective journey, because you can't be incarnated on this planet with evil running it the way that it is and not be traumatized in some way. It's a continuum. So maybe I'm over here, but everybody is traumatized in some way. And that is actually deliberate on an individual level and on a collective level. So on a collective level, what do they do to traumatize us? Wars. They're creating issues with the global food supply. They manufacture diseases, they poison us, our bodies and our air and our water. And they create things like poverty and scarcity and violence when it wouldn't really be necessary normally, so everything is unbalanced, everything is not natural. And that itself creates a traumatic situation for all of us. We incarnate here and then we're just traumatized over and over. And we need to do something to change this reality, right? And it is, we can safely say nowadays, especially, that it's a hell on earth reality. But that has been created through us, because one thing to remember is the parasites that run the world, they're psychopaths, they're Satanists, they're pedophiles, and I call them parasites rather than elites. They need our creativity. They need us to create anything. So what they've done is they've traumatized us, they've mind controlled us, they've manipulated us into creating this reality that we have today. So it's also the good news, because we then can create a different reality when we want to. So how does that start? Because people are overwhelmed and they say, well, what can I do? How changing the world is such a big thing, right? Well, it's pretty simple. Start with changing yourself. Start with healing yourself, putting yourself back together. Then when you do that, we can all join together as a human race, because they've divided and conquered us in every way that you can think of. We only have one common enemy, and it's them. So if you first do your own work and heal and restore yourself, then you come together with humanity and then reconnect to the divine, which they've also severed in us, right? And then we're unstoppable. We can actually do whatever we want. And that's the secret they don't want us to know, because they've succeeded with deception and secrecy. So that's why on Unbroken, I expose a lot of stuff. But back to this presentation, I think it's important to understand what trauma is and how it affects us and the things that we can do to heal and recover. Because once we're there, we step into our power, we remember why we came here, and then we can affect change. Yeah.
I love everything that you said. That resonated so deeply with me, and I loved what you said about them like purposely putting us in this low vibration. And they even do it to the point where, that made me think about when I'm in like a super low vibration, the last thing that I am is like feeling creative to do something good. Like it shuts off like that creative ability. You're sort of in that stressful, like fight or flight type mode where you don't really have that ability to tap into your emotions, and your imagination and bring forth a better life, And so you think about how many people are stuck, like not even being able to think about a better world because their vibration's just so stuck on like the world that we've created. It's become so normal. You
Yeah.
realize that like so many people fall into that sort of 9 to 5 workhorse life, and they never take the opportunity to say, if I were to bring something into the world, what would it be? And like let that magic moment take them to where they'd have the potential to express what they're here to do. So many people work for somebody else and just stay in this like very stressful, small, low vibration state, and not that there's anything wrong with working for people. Like I work for somebody too, but I think it's just again finding something that brings you joy that you do, working with people that, treat you with kindness and in a good environment, or creating your own stuff like how somebody like you has done. So I'm really excited to talk about this because like I said, I think, more and more people are realizing how traumatized, like you said, we are. Everything's just become so normal from birth. Like even, putting Disney movies on and stuff, you see how much traumatized children are in those movies and like these traumatizing situations. It's like right from birth, we're shown and fed all of this stuff. And then we move on to the news, and it's just, we don't even realize that we're sort of in this like low vibration state. So I'm really, really excited to learn about this from you today, especially since you're somebody I deeply admire as far as how far you've come on your journey. It's like, it takes my breath away thinking about the person that you were growing up and like, how that could have easily shut your vibration off and your creativity off for the rest of your life, and instead you broke through that barrier and now you're just this bright shining light. You're just a funnel of creativity and love, and just this high vibrational person. So I'm really, really excited to learn about this from you today.
Well, thank you. I brought some slides, so I'll talk through the slides. So let me pull those up.
Thank you for
Okay.
putting this together too. It's a awesome experience getting to sort of read along or have a visual while you're teaching.
Yeah, I think it makes it a lot easier. We want something to look at while we're also listening. So an imagery is really important. So I kind of I found this definition of trauma, which I would add a piece to it. But so what is trauma, right? Shock or severe distress from experiencing a disastrous event. Then traumatic reactions occur when people feel powerless, when nothing they can do matters. What I would also add there that's not there is trauma occurs when there's no one to help you. There's no one to witness it. And so particularly I'm thinking of children, such as myself and the trauma I went through alone. There's no adult that can be a safe haven. And so sometimes, small traumas can happen to children, but then there's a parent or an adult that says it's going to be okay and soothes them. And then the trauma won't stay. It can move through, right? So I think that's a little part that's missing from this particular definition. So trauma is usually classified into sort of two categories. Simple trauma would be a traumatic event that happened one time, like a rape, or you're in a natural disaster, tornado or a hurricane or something, or there's some kind of assault, or you witness some, violent situation. And those traumas, it's the same, but they're easier to work through and heal because it's kind of one event that's happened, or one event maybe a few times in a lifetime. And then there's complex trauma, which is what happens is the person is in captivity, is what I'm going to call it. So the trauma is repeating every day, every day, every day. So for an abused child, right? Every day something is going to happen. They're going to get some situation that's negative. Or it can be growing up in a war zone, so the person grows up and there's, you never know when the bomb's going to fall. Any kind of, being trafficked, that would be being in captivity, and you're constantly being abused and abused and abused over and over again. So you're trapped and the trauma continues and repeats. Now that is a completely different kind of trauma. It's much deeper. And I'm going to venture to say that as a human collective, as a human race, we are in complex trauma right now because we have grown up in a world where there's always something. There's a war, there's a natural weather event, they use weather warfare on us. There's there's terrorism, right, which is now rampant. And, Emma and I know that terrorism, it's the elite class, it's the parasites that run the world that create the terrorism. They're the terrorists, but they keep us in fear. Then it's always a boogeyman, right? The latest was some kind of, scary virus that was out there, right? So I would say that, unfortunately, I would call the human collective, we're trapped in this reality. And so I would call it complex trauma. So this lady wrote a great book that I read decades ago called Trauma and Recovery. Her name is Judith Herman. And she talks about it in the book, this conflict between the will to deny the trauma and then reveal or speak the trauma. And this happens individually, for example. So a traumatic event happens and we repress it. We split it off. We put it away because it's too much. But then at the same time, we behave in ways that's always revealing the trauma. It's coming out anyway. So for example, someone who's been sexually abused throughout their childhood or trafficked, the way that it might show up later is promiscuity, feeling like if somebody wants to have sex with you, you have to do it. Or people who have gone through that kind of thing, some may become, everyone who's a sex worker of any kind or in porn movies has gone through some kind of situation like this in the past. So, or even children, they're traumatized and they put it away, but then in their play, they reenact the trauma, right? So this also happens on a collective level. And so she talked about this so a long time ago, back in the late 1800s, women were considered to be hysterical, hysteria coming from the Greek root for the word uterus, because they had a uterus, right? And they would be paraded on stage and studied because they had all these symptoms and they kind of were trying to figure out, Charcot among them. And that was during the time of Freud. So Freud was the first person to actually sit down and talk to women. And he realized oh, this is because of sexual abuse. This is incest. This is the stuff that's going on. So I believe it was in 1896, he published this paper called The Etiology of Hysteria. And he named it. He said, it's not the uterus, it's the sexual abuse. Well, you can imagine this was not well received in Austria in elite society. I mean, he was exposing something that they didn't want exposed. So he got a lot of heat for it. And that's when he recanted and said, oh, no, actually, no, I made a mistake. Children fantasize about having sex with their parents or other adults. And that's the Oedipal theory, see? So on a consciousness societal level, it came up back then, it was suppressed again. And then World War I, World War II, they called it shell shock. They noticed that men that went to war and came back had PTSD symptoms. They were, all the things that had happened to them, but they didn't want to admit that that trauma. So they, at the time, they said, oh, it's just their weak character, they're just not manly enough. And so that's what happened. And then so it was buried again. And then in the 70s and 80s, it began to resurface. This knowledge of trauma in the form of domestic violence became an issue. Women's shelters started to spring up. Incest was starting to be spoken about. Rape crisis centers began to come into operation. And so again, it comes back up into the public consciousness. Oh my God, it's not just war veterans, women and children, are traumatized throughout their entire lifespan. Well, then it kind of gets submerged again. In the 90s, we have the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And for people who don't know, all the members of that foundation were either self-described pedophiles, or they were part of the CIA and MK Ultra program. So yeah, of course they're going to say, oh, so they said, oh no, this is satanic panic, this isn't true. Therapists are implanting these things into their clients' minds, and it's not really true. So every time the public awareness of trauma starts to come up, there's some force that pushes it back down, right? And it wasn't until 1980 that the American Psychiatric Association even included anything in the DSM about trauma, and they call it PTSD. So far, that's the only diagnosis for trauma that exists. They don't talk about complex trauma, they don't talk about child abuse. People have lobbied them to include this, but they won't do it, right? So because these societies are run by the same people, that run the world. But this is what Judith Herman is saying in this slide. It comes up, it gets buried. It comes up, it gets buried. And so this is just kind of the pattern that happens individually and collectively with trauma. I think it's important to understand that. So the collective human trauma wave, this is just to say there's a concerted, planned, over a long time executed agenda to traumatize all of us, okay? And this trickles down to animals. Animals are kept in captivity and tortured in these factory farms. Nature is raped, the forests are cut down. So it's an assault on life. It's an assault on the divine, on God, on whatever you want to call that energy, that life force energy. And so they have done everything from every angle to create a human population that is traumatized. And like I said earlier, there's really no one among us. Maybe there's a rare person that grew up in an environment where they haven't experienced trauma. But, I don't know if you have noticed this, Emma, but, I'm a parent, and it's sort of unconscious, but all parents, they protect their children, and children are so beautiful and innocent when they come in, and so vulnerable and so open and trusting. And parents, they kind of know, I can only keep them there for so long before the world gets to them, or they go into reality and they begin to, suffer. So it's kind of been set up that way here. Now, all addiction, in my opinion, is due to trauma. And so what is addiction? It's a way to numb the pain. The trauma is so that we don't want to feel that, it's too much, it's overwhelming. And so the addictions of whatever kind help to dissociate us, to split us off from the feelings that are coming up due to the trauma. And addictions can be alcohol, they can be drugs, they can be food, it can be work, it can be sex, it can be literally any, nowadays you can be addicted to social media. And so it's an escape. It's a way to, get away from the internal feelings that are coming up. You mentioned this earlier. It's generational trauma, It's also, if people go look up epigenetics, so the cabal likes to say that everything's genetic, but it's actually environment can change your genes. Go research epigenetics and you'll learn about that. So the trauma goes down generation to generation in that way, but also in just the way that parents will be, So if certain parents were in a war and then they live in a society that's peaceful, they're going to have that trauma in them, and the way they raise their children is going to be impacted by what they went through, even though they're living in an environment where that's no longer occurring. I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? So we have to factor in, the cabal has known this, and so they have made the trauma pass from generation to generation to generation. And Kathy O'Brien always says that the best way to mind control a population is to sexually abuse a child before the age of 5. And when families, like a survivor such as myself and many others you've interviewed, that's been the case. So the parents have been done to, the grandparents have been done to, so it passes itself down, right? So what this slide is talking about is kind of what the child has to do in a situation of abuse. So, like in my case, both my parents were not there for me. They were both abusive, and all the adults around me were. And so as a child, you instinctively know that you need these adults to survive, and you need to see them as good. Why? And then so you see yourself as bad. So you turn it around and you make yourself the bad one. Oh, I did something to deserve this. Why? Because if you're the bad one, you can hold on to that hope that if you're better or you try harder, you can turn the situation around. So it's too devastating for the child to accept the situation as it is, so that you flip it around and you say, oh, it must be me. And that makes it feel like, well, then I have control. Maybe I can make this better. I can make this change. I can make this go away, right? And then when you grow up and you're an adult, and this is what the cabal also understands, the Jesuits say, give me a child until the age of 7 and we will give you the man, right? Once that's built into you, then when you're an adult, you don't need any continual monitoring or abuse, because now you're self-abusing yourself, right? So the prison is built, first it's external, and then we bring the prison into our mind, into our being, and we continue to imprison ourselves. Look around at society, right? You see that today. So this is a phenomenon that's natural, that the powers that want to be know. And so this is why they have the educational system set up as it is, right? And they have created, for example, with the feminist movement, which they took over and steered into a direction they wanted. Part of it is like, well, if both parents go to work, then the child is put into state care earlier and earlier and earlier. Now it's supposedly good for your child to go to preschool. Actually, it's not. But this is to get the child sooner and sooner and sooner, so that they can form the child according to how they want. And then it's no accident that schools look like prisons. I mean, they literally, go look at schools. I mean, they really look like prisons, and you have to raise your hand. You have to ask permission to talk. You have to permission to go to the bathroom. You're told when you can eat. You're told information, and then regurgitating it is what gets you the A. So this is done collectively as well. So it implants all of this helplessness and powerlessness and belief in authority and all that into human beings. So by the time they grow up, as you can see today, they're much more easily manipulated. So there's hope, though, okay? So each of us has come into this world as a soul in a human body. And so it's always important to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. And yes, we have been in a spiritual war between good and evil for a very long time. And in my opinion, for myself, that's why I came. I remember volunteering to come here. And sometimes, in my human self, I've regretted that choice quite a lot. But I decided to come here and possibly be in the darkest places on the planet to understand, to be in this reality so that I could, and I think I knew I would make it out and survive, and then be able to do something about this to help other people. So there's purpose for us being here. And again, the cabal, the global cult, they have socially engineered us into a satanic worldview. Part of that is like, oh, there's no meaning to life. We're just in a meat suit. We're just these human animals, just, survival of the fittest. Darwin was a Satanist. That's a program, right? So, but it's not true. We are here for a purpose. And I said this earlier, Emma, and this is a great Rumi quote, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. That's where it starts. That's where the power is, because we have choice on that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about healing trauma. Now, healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means we learn how to work with that damage so it doesn't run our lives. So there's this saying that time heals all wounds, and that's just not true. Everything that's unhealed is operating in our subconscious. So if you've ever seen those pictures of icebergs, the tip is above the water and then the majority of the iceberg is underneath. That would be like the subconscious. That actually drives our behavior, drives our choices. We don't even know it. So it's a natural instinct. We want to ignore those bad things. And a lot of people say, oh, just don't think about it. Well, until you deal with it and feel it and heal it, it's actually going to affect every day of your life. And so it's really important to address trauma, and it can be healed. So here's some symptoms of PTSD. Now, if you look at these, Emma, I mean, I'm sure you can even point to some of them that you've experienced, right? I'm going to say this isn't like, it's not like, oh, there's trauma people and there's normal people. Like I said, we're all traumatized. So everyone can relate to this, has had this in some way or some form, or every day experiences one or two of these things. And so I just wanted to kind of have just a little look at this. There's numbness, guilt, hopelessness, self-destruction. How many times do we say negative things to ourselves, even just in our mind, much less have habits that are bad. Like, one of my self-destructive things, I'm better at it now. I've gotten control of it, but I would just want to eat sugar all the time, and then I felt sick and it didn't do my body any favors, and so it's just important to know that I believe we all suffer from PTSD. I think it's unfortunately become the norm. So when you're working with trauma, obviously the first thing is to make sure that the person is in a safe scenario. So you can't, for example, help a trafficking survivor heal if they're still being trafficked, or you can't help a woman recover from domestic violence if she's still living with her abuser, right? So the person has to be out of the active traumatic situation in order to begin to do the healing. It's important because again, the trauma causes us to split off and dissociate, so we bury it. We kind of have to bring it all back, put all the puzzle pieces together, remember what happened, and grieve that. It's so important to grieve the things that we lost, the things that happened to us, the dreams and wishes that we never had, so all these things are important. And like, it took me, for example, well into adulthood to really mourn my mother and she's still alive. But what I mean by that is the child in me kept trying to have a relationship with her and talk to her and reconnect, because that child part wanted the mom that she never had. And at some point as an adult, I had to understand she can't be that. She can't do that. She's too traumatized herself. Like, she just doesn't have that to give me. And so it broke my heart. And I realized, wow, I hung on to that well into adulthood. But so there's an importance of mourning those losses, and just like any mourning, when someone dies, it's a process, it takes a while, but to move on, you have to do that work, right? And then the reconnection part. First, we reconnect all of ourselves. We put all our pieces back together, right? And we kind of become whole. And then when we do that, we can truly connect with others, right? And when you're a trauma survivor, a complex trauma survivor, I mean, I myself felt so much of my life like I was a freak, like I was different. As a child, I went to school and I remember feeling like, oh my God, the other kids are normal, I'm so different. And so I wouldn't say anything, because I felt so separate always from other people and from life and from society and from the world, right? So there's a really important thing in healing trauma to reconnect back into community and with others. And it's an external part of the healing of the trauma, but we need, trauma makes us feel separate, so we need to do that reconnection. This is just, I mean, there's more than 7 types of therapies. There's all kinds of things nowadays, so it's really great that people can use to recover from trauma. And I would say to use a variety of them, So EMDR, for example, what it addresses, you've seen it, like there's a light, or you watch, your eyes go back and forth and follow some lights or a finger. What that's kind of doing in a very simplified version is traumatic memories are encoded differently. So when you have a normal memory, like you're riding your bike, you're 10 years old and you fall off the bike, you process the memory and you remember it, but it's kind of faded. It doesn't have a lot of charge. But a traumatic memory, because it's so shattering and so it shouldn't, happen, it's kind of like, I don't know how to describe it except like when they brand a cow, so the memory is like there and it isn't processed. And so that's why people can get flashbacks and triggered, because it's like there's a play button and all it takes is touching that play button, and then the trauma reactivates. So all the sounds and the smells and the memory, it's like it's replaying versus it's a faded process memory. I don't know if that makes sense. So EMDR can help process the memories and repackage them. And there's somatic therapies, which are good because trauma is lodged in the body. So you deal with certain, releasing it from the body. Peter Levine is a pretty famous guy on this topic, and he made this description, which I think is good, where like a gazelle is being chased by a tiger and it escapes, and then it stands there and it shakes, and it just shakes and shakes and shakes, and then the whole nervous system reboots, and then it's back, it goes back to grazing. It's not traumatized, right? Because the body has completed the process. So there's an importance in addressing the body. And then I actually really like internal family systems. And I saw this was the model that I had in my head before I even knew that it was a therapy, but I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. So these are just, we don't think of this, but there's obvious things that we all should be doing and that can be very helpful to heal ourselves. So spending time with people. We're a social species. It's, I remember reading this study about immigrant families from Latin America that came into the US, and they were healthier as a cohort than American families that had been in the US generationally and were now American. And what was the difference that they found is the family connection, the social connections, right? We have an epidemic of loneliness now. We're so separate. Studies about people in blue zones that live to be over 100. There's a lot of the factors are like the nutritious food, but a huge factor is the social fabric that they live in, right? So you can't underestimate that. Things like mindfulness, shutting out the world and going inward, which is where you connect with your divinity, and some people say, they're guides or they're angels, or you just shut the outer world out and you get insights and you get healing from that. I mean, if you slow down that much, it's just, if nothing else, it's really good for your nervous system to just like calm down. Exercise, huge thing. We live in a body, okay? We're a consciousness in a body. We have to take care of the vessel. And we live in modern times, we're very sedentary. I try every day, even though I have to sit a lot for my work, to get up in the middle, to go take a walk, even a short one, and to go to do some form of exercise every day. Journaling. Journaling is really good because you're taking the time to talk to yourself, to write to yourself. Sometimes if you have parts, different parts can communicate through the journaling. We'll write out different things. It's really, in terms of any therapy, a huge important tool. Counseling, obviously, and just changing your lifestyle in general to become healthy. I've sort of mentioned this before, but there's stages of healing. So you kind of have to, like that dialectic between denial and and exposure, you have to sort of admit, like, okay, I went through this. You have to get yourself safe. You have to process all of the stuff, and then there's a lot of emotional, release, crying or anger or whatever, and then you integrate yourself. This is, again, more PTSD stuff. So remember I said the traumatic memories are encoded differently. So when something triggers the person, so a nightmare is the trauma coming back in your sleep. A flashback is the nightmare coming back, is the trauma coming back during the day. So a flashback, for example, a war vet, is walking down the street, a car drives by and backfires, and he dives to the ground and starts screaming, He has been, by the sound, transported back to some situation in war where maybe a bomb went off or something, and he literally, in the flashback, relives the experience. Okay, the body gets involved, there's sweating, there's nervous system stuff. And because the memories aren't healed and processed, they can intrude, So a lot of survivors get agoraphobic, or they just avoid a lot of situations in the world out of fear that that will reactivate their trauma. And, I can relate to this myself, just constantly having a sense of anxiety, fear, just even though my current environment would be safe, it's in there, so it's just that kind of, I used to call it like the little mouths gnawing at me internally always, like just living with that. And then the fight or flight stuff, being very irritable. I have so many sleep problems, sometimes difficulty concentrating. So these are all things that are sequelae to trauma and highlight the importance of kind of processing and healing it so we don't have to live this way. This is the internal family systems model that I truly like because it's non-pejorative. It doesn't say, oh, you're mentally ill or you're this, like in psychology, you like to diagnose people, which I don't agree with at all. This model says, okay, so something happened and the way that you cope, which is true, is you split it off and you put it away. So it's like, let's just use me an example. So the things that happened to me, child parts of me would split off and would hold that traumatic situation. And then as the word they use here is it's exiled. So it's like put away. And so that was me for a long time. And you don't really remember it. You kind of do, but you kind of don't. And it's suppressed. And then there's other parts that develop that they call firefighters, whose job is to keep those parts holding the trauma exiled and packed away. So, oh, it's coming up. Let's drink. Let's get drunk. Let's go fight with someone. Let's go play video games. There's always some activity that's occurs to kind of like noise so that, oh, we don't want that to surface, right? And then the managers are kind of like the main personality that you develop that keeps all those trauma memories neatly out of your awareness, or from bubbling up. And people can be very, like it says, controller, striver, caretaker. I sublimated it and became a caretaker. That's how I one of my coping mechanisms that I used. I like this image because it really illustrates, this is all of our minds. To some degree, we all have different parts, right? And then to this end of the continuum, it's called DID, dissociative identity disorder. When you're on one end, you're what they used to call a multiple. So you have literally different personalities that don't know of each other's existence. And it's very clever and really an amazing survival tactic that people's minds do, because the trauma, to handle it, different people handle different parts of the trauma. And the problem with being completely split is then parts will come out in situations. So if there's a danger situation in someone who has DID, who's a multiple, then parts will come up that are warrior-like, that can deal with the situation, and vulnerable parts will be pushed back to the bottom, right? But to some degree, it's a continuum. We all have different parts. And so, like, as a more normal example, I used to wonder this about myself because I'm a double Cancer. I'm very shy and introverted. And I don't, that part of me is like, people are like, oh, let's go out. When I was young, let's go to a party. And I'd be like, I don't want to do that. But then another part of me would be super social and would want to be around people and would be like, yay, let's go do something. And so what would happen is somebody would invite me to something and that part would go, yeah, and then when the time came, the other part would go, oh God, why did I say yes? I changed my mind, right? It's kind of a simple thing, but I think we all can identify with that, right? I think it's a good idea to adopt the concept that we all have inner children, okay? We all had things, whether, small traumas, neglect of some kind, where needs weren't met. There's always child parts that live in us, and maybe that's good, because we don't want to become dried up and stodgy. We want to have, children are playful and creative. So, in a positive way, we want that energy in us, but we all have child parts. And so just watch ourselves. We need to watch ourselves, like, is a child part up because am I behaving this way or having this feeling? Like, is that my inner child? And then kind of try and work with that inner child, right? So as I was telling you earlier, Emma, I'm in a period of transition where I'm moving. So, oh boy, my inner child who, as a child, I moved from country to country to country. That inner child is coming up and going, no, I don't like this instability. And then a more adult part of me is like, no, this is something that I'm doing for myself that I want to do. But I have to be aware of that child and take care of that inner child and say, you know what, it's okay. Don't worry. It's not the same thing as the past. And this is actually beneficial for us, and that kind of thing. So check in with yourself every day and see where your child is at. And if somebody says something or an event happens and you have a big reaction, then definitely check to see if that's the inner child. Like I said earlier, journaling is super, super important. We have a lot of thoughts that go through our mind all the time. And so, especially when we're trying to work on something, it's super useful. It helps in a myriad of ways to write the thing down, to explore it with ourselves through the written word. This is just kind of our biology, right? We have a part of our brain, some might say we've been genetically manipulated and this part's really been put in there, but whatever it is, we have this fight or flight system. It's back here. And it exists for a situation of actual real danger, right? So if a wild animal is in front of us and about to eat us, thinking is too costly. It takes too many seconds. So that part of the brain shuts down this part, the prefrontal cortex, where you think and reason, and you react. So you run like hell or you fight, right? And there's another one in here, which is called freeze, which is like, say a child is being raped, they can't run and they can't fight. So the only thing they can do is actually leave their body. So their consciousness splits off and dissociates. And that's loosely what I would include in the freeze category. Like there's no other option, right? So the consciousness itself gets altered. And fawn, I like this slide because, so I had this when I was younger. I would just always bend over backwards for other people. I wanted to please people. I had really tough time saying no. This is a trauma response, you feel so worthless and you've been abused so much that you think your only value is by making other people happy, and otherwise you'll be alone and people will leave you. And of course, that's entirely not the case. This is just a slide to show that we biologically, neurologically, within our nervous system have a whole process that happens when we go into fight or flight. Now, this process is supposed to be in emergencies only, and then the body's supposed to reset, right? Like in the gazelle example. The problem is in our reality, in our world today, with the cabal, we're kept in this all the time, right? And so in the last few years, it's never been more better illustrated than the fear porn that was thrown out about some boogeyman virus that's going to kill us all. And it kept people in a state of panic and fear because it was repeated over and over and over again, which led people to go actually make choices that harmed that, they always have an agenda. And so if you keep the population's nervous system in fight or flight all the time, well, guess what? We're much easier to manipulate. And so this is just a little more on that, so what does fight look like? Being irritable. I had a lot of fight in me as a young person. So if something, if somebody bothered, I would just like, I'm 5'2", but I felt like I would become 7 foot tall, and I'd be like, that was my response, to be very angry and to kind of fight back. Flight, I would call flight, I would put addictions in flight. You're escaping reality, by being drunk or on drugs or whatnot. And then freeze, I would say, is like just not being there, again, altering your consciousness. And I think like excessive time watching TV or on social media would kind of describe that. So we do this. I like this slide. I think it makes me laugh. Because the fear is a choice to some degree. It's biologically induced, but we can, with our consciousness, not succumb to the fear. And we do live in an Orwellian nightmare right now. I want to talk about triggers real quick. So because we tend to avoid, we're like, oh no, that's going to trigger me, I'm going to avoid it. Or being triggered is bad, something bad happened. I say no. Being triggered is really good. The person that triggers you has done you a favor inadvertently, because by being triggered, you have an opportunity. You can only be triggered because some existing wound in you gets activated. That's what the being triggered is. So it's an opportunity. It's like a window opens and you can go back to whatever that wound is in the past and clean it out. You can see what's still inside you. How do you find what's in you? By being triggered. And I like the Toltec shaman, Miguel Ruiz. He wrote some really simple books. And he made this example that always stuck with me, where it's kind of like if you have a bruise right here, you're fine until somebody accidentally touches that bruise, and then, you react. So that's what I mean by triggers. And so what we tend to do is somebody says, blah, 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 it triggers me. And then I react back on the person with the full force of my past, of the original wound. So like 80–90% of my reaction isn't even from the present moment. It's like all the kitchen sink coming out at the person. So we tend to overreact. Then the other person becomes triggered and reacts back on us. Then we create all this trauma drama. And then we have stuff later when we calm down, we're like, oops, and then we have something to clean up, right? So I think it's super important, and this is what I learned to do. When I'm triggered, I feel what I feel, but I know, okay, something got activated in me. And what I do is if I'm in front of someone, I say, I've got to go. I need to take some time. If I'm on the phone, I say, I hang up, I'll call you back. And I release the emotions. I just let myself be angry or frustrated or sad or whatever it is, so that my nervous system can kind of come back to baseline. And then I kind of go, all right, so what was that? What's the memory? What did that bring up in me? What did that open up? And then you can go back and sit with that child part, or the part that's holding the trauma. You can release the emotions. You can comfort that part, and you can reframe it and say, oh, well, that actually wasn't really, that just triggered something in me. So don't respond in the moment when you're triggered. And how do you know you're triggered? Your breathing is fast, you're sweating, you can feel when you're getting, So when you feel that, just go hit the pause button, okay? And so I myself can be quite good with the written word. So how many times did I blow it? I can't even tell you, where somebody would say something and I would write a vicious email back to them, or text or something, and say things and then hit send and then later regret it. I think we've all done that, right? So that's because I responded when I was triggered. So I created a moratorium for myself. If somebody triggers me, I can write it out, but I can't send it. I have to sit on it until I'm no longer triggered. And then 99.9% of the time, I never send the communication. And if I do, it's completely different, and it's in favor of resolving a situation rather than reacting on someone. A lot of the pain that we have is from our own thoughts. So, think about that for a sec, Emma. How many times do we hurt ourselves with our own thinking? And see, the human brain cannot distinguish between a real external event, something that's on a screen, which is why when you watch a movie, if something scary happens, you react, right? Or there's a sad scene and you cry. Or the brain also doesn't distinguish between our own thinking. So we can think ourselves into a state of panic. I've done that myself, right? So it's super important to put your thoughts on a whiteboard. Like, okay, so you think something, and I'm going to say, if you feel icky in any way, question like, okay, what was I just thinking? And then go to the thought and then put it on a whiteboard and go, is that true? Or is that a distorted thought that comes from, trauma that I've been through? What is another way that I can look at this? So for example, I'll give you an example. I have a tendency, because of my childhood, if somebody, like I have this friend and she connects often, like every day or every couple of days. And then a week went by and she didn't contact me. And I started to get paranoid and think, oh my God, she hates me. She doesn't love me. What's going on? And I put myself in a really low frequency because I was worried that I've lost this friend. And it was so ridiculous. And then when I talked to her next, I told her, and she's like, what? Don't ever think that. Like, that's silly. Of course, why would I leave you? I love you. And I thought, oh, there it goes. That's my thought, right? So you've got to, in that case, what I should have done is thought, maybe it's not about me. What else could it be? Maybe she's busy, maybe she's sick, but that's just an example. And then I think perspective, right? So I like particularly the one that, what if every rejection is a redirection, right? It's that saying, like, when one door closes, maybe your soul has a better door that's open for you. So why go bang on the closed door when we could just see it like, okay, we're just being redirected. And when you see it that way in this one particular example, you don't cause yourself suffering, right? Now so zoom out and look at the situation from a different perspective, right? And failures or mistakes, if you learn from those, they're good. They're stepping stones to you evolving yourself to being a better version of you, a better person. This is something I just want to talk about briefly because this is a trap, and this is a cabal trap for us, right? So it's called the drama triangle, and you only alternate between these three. So victim, rescuer, or I call it savior, and persecutor, which I call perpetrator. So if you're a victim, then you're going to have a perpetrator. And if you're a perpetrator, and if you're a victim, if you're a savior, like I used to be, then you tend to, if I want to save someone, then they by default have to be a victim. So I'm not doing them any favors, actually, by putting them in that box. And we all know people who identify with one of these. So, my mother, for example, is a victim. And so everything, so if I have said in the past things to help her become empowered or take control of situations, she becomes very angry and then attacks me. So then she becomes the persecutor and I become the victim because I was trying to rescue her. See? So you get stuck in that. And some people want to be a victim. And in our society today, victimhood is being like, ooh, that fire is being stoked massively. Everyone's a victim now. If you call someone the wrong pronoun, you're a perpetrator and they're a victim. And it's a terrible state to be in because it's very, very disempowered. This is done deliberately. I'm sure, Emma, you've heard about the Hegelian dialectic. This is a tactic that they use. They create the problem. They know the reaction, they anticipate it, and then they ride in on their white horse with the solution or the savior, which is actually the agenda that they wanted. And so I don't know how much I can say if you're on YouTube, but in the last 4 years, that was the case. There was a boogeyman thrown out, panic, 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 everyone was afraid. They rode in with the solution, which was something that you put into your body that in fact actually is the true agenda and is a weapon and is harmful. But that's how they get people, when 9/11 happened, it was, oh, terrorism, terrorism. And then the solution is to pass the Patriot Act, which makes us all enemy combatants, takes away our rights, makes spying on us completely legal. Well, that was what they wanted, but they had to do the steps to get us to accept that solution, right? So it's important to know this. So when things happen, like think about this and the drama triangle. Real quick, this is critical to all human beings, attachment. They have done studies in psychology with baby monkeys. Psychology has done horrific studies, which I don't approve of, but they took baby monkeys away from the mother and then they put them in a cage and they had two choices. They had a wire mesh mother figure with a bottle with milk, and they had a wire mesh mother figure covered in some soft terry cloth. The baby monkeys clung to the soft terry cloth mother substitute and starved to death because attachment is more important than food for all of us mammals, right? This is something that the elite, the cabal knows. And so this is something that they attempt to destroy in all of us. And in survivors, I'm sure you've heard, Emma, so many of us talk about the deliberate rituals to break attachment. This is the prime way to get someone malleable and easy to manipulate and mind control. Break it from the very beginning because it's that critical. So they have now in psychology attachment styles. They're secure, where you trust others and, all of that. I think most of us in society now, if you kind of take a peek at this chart, I won't spend much time on it, but very few people today have secure attachment, and that's been deliberately done because it's the single most foundational thing in our psychology that we can have is a healthy, secure attachment. So I included some slides of what attachment should look like and what it looks like in other mammals. So look at this, how cute. This is attachment, okay? See, the babies are on the mother's body. They're touching the mother.
So cute.
See? Yes. And now I'm going to show you what it shouldn't look like. Okay, now look at the contrast here. What is this? This is deliberate. When a baby is born, they are supposed to be on the mother's body. That's the beginning of the baby feeling safe and getting a sense of itself. So what has the cabal done? Babies are born in hospitals, which are brutal places, and then they're put in a room all by themselves. Like this almost looks like a jail to me. What is this? This is not natural, and this is deliberate. And I particularly like this image because here's the bars of the prison, right? So even this idea and all the books, because I have a daughter who's almost 21, and I read all these books, and they tell you, like, what the hell are we doing that a baby is in a separate bedroom in a crib by itself? That's not natural, but that's what they're teaching parents to do. And then they say to let the baby cry it out. No, at this stage of life, they need to be with the caretaker's body, attached. And actually, if you tend to your infant's needs whenever they need them, that's what actually builds solidity and security in the person. And then at some age, they become independent. So if you see a healthy, independent adult, that independent, healthy adult had their needs met in infancy when the needs needed to be met. And we also see a lot of adults out in the world who are like big infants, well, because they didn't get what they needed, right? So if you want to make a secure, independent person, you tend to that child's needs and they developmentally grow out of it, and then they need less and less and less. So we're doing it exactly backwards on purpose. Now, this one shows a much more normal reality. See, babies, until even a certain age, they don't even know. They grew inside our bodies, and then they came out, and ideally they breastfeed, and they're held a lot. So it takes them a while to figure out they're actually a separate person from the caregiver. And so this is emotional attunement, what you see here. The baby gets to know that it's good and loved and lovable and okay because of the expression on the mother's face. Okay, so that's what builds the inside of the baby, what they see and experience with the mother, right? So you can imagine when that's not there, what that does to an individual. I'll just go quickly through here. These again are common sense, but we don't have common sense anymore in the world. To have a healthy, good life and to heal, you need to have good sleep. It's part of when you sleep, you restore your body, you process things in your mind, and you can leave your body and reconnect with other parts of yourself in other dimensions with your soul. It's incredibly necessary and restorative. And if it weren't so, then why does every living being sleep? Clearly, this is significant. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a really good book called The Body Keeps the Score. And in there, he talks about the 3 exercises that are most helpful for trauma. And that is yoga, martial arts, which I've done, and dance. There are 3, any exercise is good, but these 3 particularly help with the trauma in the body. Everything you put in your mouth is going to affect your consciousness. Deliberately, we're being put in a world where everything is poisoned, because if we're poisoned, if we're weak in our vessel, then we're weak in our mind, and again, we're easier to control and manipulate. I put this book in here. I think everybody should take a look at it. This guy was perplexed as to why modern nutrition led to people who were always sick and who had crooked teeth and not fully formed jawlines and not enough fully formed hips. So childbirth was really difficult. And he studied these indigenous cultures all over the world, even indigenous, like in Europe, I think it was Sweden, and found the commonality in the diet of people that were healthy. And these people had perfectly straight teeth and had much easier childbirth. So I won't go into it, but check out his work. He has some beautiful pictures. And of course, one of the things that's significant is that these people grew food in nutritious soil. So our soil has been deliberately stripped of its nutrients, because then if you eat a vegetable grown in bad soil, you're not going to get the nutrients. Again, they don't want us to have proper nutrition. Corporate food is designed to be poisonous. Fast food, any of that crap, don't eat it. Start with, you can get a CSA box from a farm. Connect with a farm particularly nowadays when they're trying to destroy the global food supply chain. Connect with your farm or farmers and get some food grown locally in the earth. This is going to make your consciousness and your health, including your mental health, much better. I mean, I just love, like, even looking at these vegetables, you feel good, right? Not, none of that fake lab thing or insects or, no. And so, because you are what you eat. And farmers markets, go to them, support these people. They're the healthier we eat, and it's getting harder and harder, but the healthier and faster we're going to heal in all areas. I love David Hawkins' map of consciousness. If you take a look at it, he has emotions linked with a frequency, right? So what's important to know is that the cabal wants us in the survival frequencies. They work very hard to keep us there. Shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire, and anger. They also can feed off this bandwidth. The etheric parasites can feed off our loosh when we're in this survival frequency. They themselves are so low frequency that when we rise to the top of this frequency scale, we're actually out of their reach. If we all could get to the top of that scale and live there, they would literally not even be in our reality anymore. Like I said, they use us to create the current reality we live in. Everything is frequency. Everything is energy. So if you find yourself in one of these survival emotions because you got triggered or whatever, great. Feel them, let them out, and then reframe for yourself, put yourself back into the high frequency. So release and then do whatever you have to do to go back to high frequency. Take a walk, cuddle your pets, Google babies laughing on the internet. I swear if you watch babies laughing, you will start laughing yourself. You cannot not. Do anything, go out in the sun. Turn your negative thoughts into gratefulness. Whatever it takes, it's super, super important to know that we're manipulated into lower frequencies so that they can create this nasty reality that we don't want, okay? Like I said here, everything we think, we feel, we do, because we're actually all energetic beings, so we mix with each other. It's invisible to us, but So when I think an angry or nasty thought, I check myself and go, wait a minute, no, I don't want to put that out into the collective field, because reality is collective. So if we all healed ourselves and got control of our frequency and our thoughts, and we put thoughts of like what we want to see, the world we want it to be, that's super, super powerful. So every time you want to have a negative thought, remember it's going to ripple out and affect every single other living being on this planet. To illustrate that, this is the Japanese scientist Emoto's work. He studied water. His book is gorgeous. It has all these pictures. He would tape words or play music to glasses of water. So like thank you or truth or I love you versus negative things. Then he would freeze the water and look at the crystals under a microscope. And I think it speaks for itself. Look how beautiful and harmonious the crystals with the positive words are versus the negative. Look at the one that's evil. I mean, that it looks like the eye of Sauron. That's horrific, right? So again, everything is frequency, everything is energy. So what we say to ourselves or to each other or think is literally, I mean, we're made of mostly water, right? So imagine what if our self-talk is negative, it's actually affecting the cells in our body. Words are spells, right? That's why they call it spelling. So when you say words, be careful what you're saying, what you're putting out there. And, you know, this is just my theory, but COVID stands for Certificate of Vaccination ID, right? It's actually coronavirus, so that's the virus. Why did they call it that? Because every time we said that word, the spell was, let's make this agenda come to fruition. That was the agenda. It didn't happen, but or there's words like weekend, WEEK, but we in English it's a very spelly language. You can also see it as WEAK, weekend, the weekend to a week. We're weak. We're saying that, or good morning. It can be MOURNING, like, you know, we're more, or hello, like it's really crazy when you start to look at it, but start to pay attention to words and what you're spell casting when you use words, you know? So I try, it's hard, you know, because we've been conditioned this way, but I even look at certain things like when I first saw Google, I thought, oh my God, it's go ogle. Ogle means to spy, right? Well, they're telling us also in words a lot of information. So, you know, again, I don't have all day to spend a ton of time on this, but there's information on this that you can go look at and consider when you're using words. Like stop and think about what you're using. And, you know, you pray, Emma, in the beginning of of your interviews, and that's putting a good spell out there, right? So prayer can be a really positive spell. So just keep that in mind. This is cymatics. You can Google this. Basically, sound, they put some kind of powder or whatever on a platform, and when you play music, it forms a pattern. It's kind of like the Emoto thing with the water crystals. It just shows us that everything is energy. So when there's a certain frequency, matter forms in specific and certain ways, and they know that. So music used to have a 432 hertz, which is harmonious, kind of like the water crystals would look nice. They changed music, the Cabal, to 440 hertz. Why? To stress us, to another way, another prong in their multi-pronged approach to reduce our consciousness and make us sick and unwell. They literally changed the frequency in music so that it's no longer harmonious, so that it's harmful. And so you can look up so many cymatic experiments. And this kind of also nowadays you can find, like even on Spotify, solfeggio frequencies. So there's frequency music that can raise you up and lift you up. So I, for example, listen to certain frequencies in meditation, and they have frequencies for everything, like to get out of fear, to connect with your third eye, et cetera, et cetera. And a talk on trauma and recovery wouldn't be complete if I didn't talk about frequency, because ultimately that's it, right? And so they're trying to lower our frequency all the time. So the solution is heal that stuff that is low frequency when it comes into you, and get back into high frequency. That's the best defense against what they're trying to do. So, what are the solutions? Love is the solution. Meditation, forgiveness, consciousness. That's what they have tried to do with everything, with the educational system, the medical system, the food system, the media, all of it is to reduce our consciousness. Because again, consciousness is when we get to a certain level of consciousness, we're free. We're not slaves anymore. So realizing that we have the power within us, that actually we ourselves are the solution. Kathy O'Brien uses this word. Transcending is the trance ending, right? We've been in a trance. And so I think this is what we're doing right now. It's all about consciousness. It's all about consciousness. And so the world isn't getting darker, it's detoxifying. The darkness that we see, it represents the things that are being exposed and let go. So the world isn't getting darker, it's just being exposed. We're just seeing the darkness that's always been there, and we're purging it out so it's there in our face. But it's not getting worse, it's actually getting better. I just put this slide in here because we are creators. We've been created in the image of our creator, and we're mini creators. And we can manifest anything. And I think there were versions of humanity in the past that were way more advanced than we are. And, I suspect the pyramids were built by mental manifestation, by moving the blocks with the mind, So we can, and in the stories of Jesus, right? Where he suddenly makes many loaves of bread or many fish from one and feeds the multitudes, he manifested that into existence. We actually have this superpower. And so again, the cabal uses that superpower to manifest the world they want, but we can take that back and we can visualize and put into manifestation not only what we need personally, but how about a whole new reality, a whole new earth that we want to see. Spend 10 minutes every day visualizing and manifesting a new earth that you want it to look like. Because if we all do that, oof, that's super, super powerful. Every time one of us heals, we're like a light bulb that turns on in this dark world. And what does light do? It poofs away the darkness, okay? Darkness is simply an absence of light. It's not a thing unto itself, okay? So the importance of healing ourselves and putting ourselves back together is that imagine it's happening now, but imagine when there's enough light bulbs on, there will be no more darkness. Just a quick thing, if you want a frequency raiser, gratitude. I try every day when I wake up to list the things I'm grateful for. How many people I say thank you for a roof over my head and a hot shower and food, because a lot of people don't have that, okay? So we can be grateful because the sun is out. We can be grateful for anything, because we eat some food and it's really yummy. Just try to be grateful. Write down a gratitude journal. It reprograms your brain to then see things that you are grateful for. And the more that you're grateful, the more that the universe brings things for you to be grateful for back into your life. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Spend time, even if it's 20 minutes a day, Meditating. Meditating means just sit still, just tune inwards, just feel yourself, feel your breathing, talk to God or your guides or whatever the universe, however you conceptualize that consciousness, just connect, just get out of the outer world for a little bit. And when we do that, when we heal ourselves, then we reach out to other people. We help everybody else up. And because we're interdependent, we're all one consciousness in little different bodies experiencing itself. Everything that happens, we need each other. So if we lift others up, we lift ourselves up, okay? If we help another person, we're helping ourselves as a human race. That's why they divide and conquer us. So when we're okay, then we can lend a hand to somebody else. And this slide I included, and I think I've said this before to you, Emma, when I was about 5 years old and I was living in Africa, in Lesotho, I was looking up at the sky at night, laying on the ground, and I saw all these stars shooting down onto the earth. And the image and the voice said to me, a bunch of you came here. We're star beings. We came here to be on this planet right now for this transition that's happening. And the voice said, hang in there, because when you grow up, you'll find these other people. And that's what I think we're here for. This planet has been hijacked by evil, by the dark. And so we volunteered to come. We're elite warriors because, I mean, the beings that are our guides that are helping us from over there, I've heard them say to me, no, you're the one who took the hard job. You went down there. But we wanted to be here to help transition this planet from darkness to light. And it's happening. We're doing it. So we fall, we break, we fail, but then we rise, we heal, and we overcome. And that's why I've thought of the word unbroken for my podcast, because we've been broken, but guess what? We can unbreak ourselves, and we're doing that right now. So the dark night of the soul comes just before the revelation. When everything seems lost and all seems darkness, then comes the new life and all that is needed. That's what we're in right now. That's why it looks so dark, because we're in the dark night of the soul. But guess what's after that? The rebirth. So I see it. I see the awakening of global consciousness every single day. We are coming out of that trauma individually and collectively. And it's a new age right now. It's a golden age that we've begun right now. And so guess what? The world isn't ending. Their world is ending. So, bye-bye cabal, because this is our planet, this is our world, and we're taking it back. And basically it starts with healing ourselves and taking back ourselves. That's the first step.
Wow, where do I even start on that? Thank you for putting that together. That was so thorough and covered so many bases of healing, and it was so fascinating to see sort of where it started and where it went. Thank you so much for putting that together. I want to unpack so much. I feel like I could have you on for a whole nother episode to even just like dive more deep into this. But I wanted to ask you, before I ask you more questions about your presentation, I wanted to ask you about your own healing journey and what worked for you and what didn't whenever you were going through your own journey of discovering all of this that you just put in that presentation.
I think the first thing that I ended up doing, because I got out when I was 18, I went to school, I got a undergrad degree and 2 grad degrees, but I started working in the field of trauma. So I was doing trauma groups for women in a women's prison. I was working in the inner city at the time in Washington, D.C., where I lived, and helping people that were homeless and, were traumatized. I ended up working with men who batter. So I ran a men's groups for domestic violence perpetrators. So I learned kind of, that aspect of it. I worked at rape crisis centers with kids that have been abused. And it was and I worked in a mental hospital in the very beginning. And so it was being able to help other people recover from trauma, strangely enough, was part of my own recovery. When I was a child, I saw so many people tortured and killed, and I was helpless. So for me, there was something super important in doing something out in the world that I felt like I was making a difference. And, it was very helpful. And, all of that then sort of was kind of excavating things in me slowly but surely. I had to have a period of time where I put all that away, you know. Um, and at some point, I went to therapy. And that was very, very helpful for me. The most helpful part of it was that I had never experienced any attachment. And like I showed in the slideshow, how important that is, right? So having this therapist, and I worked with this one therapist for 10 years, I was able to build that attachment, her consistency and her presence, and I would project all kinds of things out onto her, my expectations, but she would just remain very firm and solid. And I began to trust, I began to attach, I began to feel like, oh my God, somebody cares about me, somebody is witnessing. And it enabled a lot of the memories to come up and out, and for me to process them and feel the emotions and all that. So therapy was super beneficial. Changing my habits, it seems simple, but it's worth talking about, just learning to eat properly, to sleep, to exercise, to spend time in nature, all of these things were super, you don't realize how important they are, but everything you put in your mouth is going to affect your consciousness. And then I did struggle with really low self-esteem, with, they program us with these inner, like, police, like critics. So I was so harsh with myself. I would say something, and then later I would beat myself, like with a stick, not literally, but, internally, like, oh my God, why did I say that? I'm so stupid. They're never going to talk to me again. It's like everything I would do, I would have this backlash and punitiveness. Like, there was no one more abusive to me than myself in my own mind, And so I had to learn, the hard way to stop doing that, to I had to build a different internal voice, and it took a long time, it took a long time, and it caused me a lot of suffering. There were things like, because I was trafficked, and I would be at these like homes, I didn't know the people, or I would be in a hotel. When I traveled and I had to stay in an Airbnb or a hotel, I would panic. Like that night, I wouldn't sleep. The whole time, I wouldn't sleep. I would just be in like panic attacks all night long. And that one I overcame by just kind of what they would just call exposure therapy. It's just like doing it. Like I would go, and then I would talk to my inner child all night long, and I would feel the emotions and breathe and try and relax my nervous system. And over time, today I can say, which seems like a miracle, I can travel and stay places, and that doesn't even happen even the first night. It doesn't happen at all anymore, right? So it's a process. I wanted to be instantly healed, and yeah, it doesn't happen that way. I remember once I asked my therapist, like, when will I be cured? And she said, sweetheart, only hams are cured, you know. And it's like,
Smart.
oh, okay. And I had no patience for process. I wanted just to get from here to here. And I think on some level, when we're not in a physical body, that is how we are. We can think something and it's automatic, but we're in form, we're in time and space. So I had to develop patience. And it was really hard for me not to think negatively. So I've really, really gotten into the habit of having a self-observer. So when I'm thinking a negative thought or I'm scared, I go, wait, oh, stop. Okay, what am I doing? And I find a reframe. I find a thing that turns what because the lens which we look through is programmed into us societally, individually, through our experiences. So important to question what we're thinking, to question ourselves, to look at ourselves all the time. So I had to develop that habit, and that took a long time. And the mistakes I would have made is just expecting something or someone out there to save me. No, we've got to do it ourselves. We can have support, we can have people who love us, but ultimately, and I fell into that trap because I had child parts that never got parenting. So I wanted the people around me to become my mommy and daddy, and no one can do that. You can barely do it when you have a physical baby of your own and you are a parent. It's very taxing. I mean, it's like, oh my God, those first few years you don't sleep, everything's about your baby. I think it's a spiritual exercise to become a parent, but no adult is going to give another adult that level of it, so really learning to be self-loving, I would say that's been a huge journey. I hated myself. I was taught to hate myself, so really, and it helped that a lot of other people saw things in me and loved me and told me how great I was. That's like that slide with the mother looking at the baby, and I didn't have that. So learning to love myself, I would say, and learning to trust my guidance, my soul, God, whatever you want to call that, that every step of my life was for me. So everything I might be resisting or feel is bad or I'm scared of, how was that for me? Because when I look back, I can see it. I'm like, oh, that relationship broke up. And then I moved all the way across the country to the West Coast because I was supposed to, that was for me. If I had stayed, I wouldn't have developed into who I am today, right? And I would say not feeling like a victim. And for that, I'm grateful to my mother. She was a great teacher because she's a big victim, and it's so unattractive that I never wanted to, it never really was a choice that I wanted to make. But seeing myself as empowered, that I can make choices. There's always something that I can do. And so does that answer your question? Those are kind of some of the things I can think of.
Yes, thank you for that. I love just hearing all the individual journeys, and it adds tools to people's toolboxes just like your presentation did. Another thing I wanted to bring up that you talked about, and I really appreciate you bringing this up because it's not talked about enough, is the epigenetic part and how that even ties into emotions. I fell into that trap too. My background is in health and wellness. And when I was going to school for exercise science, I really wanted to work with people in the gym. I wanted to be a personal trainer. Everything I was told, there were so many statistics of like, if you have one parent that has had heart disease or cancer, then you have this percentage of getting it. And it was so like analytical and set in stone that like, this is what it is. This is the percentage that it is. And at almost every gym that I worked at, we had to do these questionnaires where people filled out like a health form, and it would almost have these equations of what percentage they have of getting a genetic disease inherited to them and what they should be aware of. And although I think there's some truth to that, like you said, if you just repeat the pattern, it's going to happen to you, right? But when it comes to like our own health, some of the things that like I discovered later on after reading Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton, who talks
Yeah,
about epigenetics,
yeah,
was about how habits get carried down just like abuse does. So say that, for example, for generations, a family just eats processed food. Well, if you don't break out of that, you're probably going to have kids and that's going to be their diet if it's your diet. Where if somebody goes down that line and says, wait, I'm going to do what Max told me in that presentation, I'm going to start going to the farmer's market and buying fresh produce, getting local meat. I'm going to start eating organic, reading ingredients, and eat whole foods. Well, now if you have children, you just broke that cycle and it's a different type of abuse, but food is still abuse, like you said, and that can genetically modify us. And so I
Yep.
think like realizing our power, like that is so amazing because that still isn't covered a lot in, academia. It's so genetically based and it doesn't share with us that there's so many different ways that we can break generational trauma in our bodies. And it can be with how we look at the world. It can be with having positive belief systems, like how you didn't take the victim mentality that your mother did. Another child who may not have had your perspective may have adopted that victim mentality and then lived that way, and then perhaps had a child who took that on, And so I just want to thank you for covering that part because that is not talked about enough. And I think it's very discouraging because why would you want to or be motivated to make a big change if it's just set in stone that this is exactly how it's
Right.
going to be, right?
Yeah. It's a life sentence and it's hypnosis. So, doctors will say to someone, oh, well, you have 6 months to live. And if people believe that, they will literally die in 6 months. But then there's those people that refuse to believe it and they live 10 years, right? And that's why the placebo effect exists. So when they do studies, they give some people the medicine and they give some people nothing, a sugar pill. But the people that are receiving it don't know if they're in the placebo group or the medicine group. And both groups, they always both get better. Why? Because of the belief. The belief that, oh, they gave me something and it's healing me. It's more the belief because our bodies are self-healing. That's the gift from God that we also come with. And we've been disabused of that. We've been taught that there's germs out here. So you look into terrain theory. It's a whole nother thing I won't go into, but we can heal ourselves. And that's why when they diagnose you with a mental illness, oh, you're bipolar. Well, then you're going, what do you mean you're bipolar? You're a human being. You become the diagnosis. So exactly in the gym, your clients are like, oh, well, genetically, I'm predisposed to die of cancer. So, you know, well, you can hypnotize people into believing that. And of course, you can see why that would be an agenda, right?
Absolutely. And then how, like you said, if you think about it enough and if you believe it, you manifest it. So guess what that person
Yep.
gets in 10 years because they've thought about it so much, all of a sudden they get cancer in 10 years. Is it because it was genetic or is it because
Yep.
of the beliefs?
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Bruce Lipton, that book, Biology of Belief, everybody should read that. That's a great book.
Oh my gosh, that totally changed my world. There was another book I read around the same time called Molecules of Emotion, and it sort of played on that where it talked about how our emotions can store in our body and present themselves as disease and dysfunction. And there were some really interesting correlations with that, which I think, survivors know that better than anybody, let's just like how you were saying with The Body Keeps the Score. That's an incredible book. But it's like if we don't deal with those emotions, like it's energy, it's just circulating inside of us. And if it's like that low frequency, that fear, that terror, that shame, that guilt, and it's just in there, like what is that going to do to us, right? There was something that I was reading. I wish I could remember all of them, but there was a chart that I read. It might have even been in Molecules of Emotion or in another book that I've read about this, but it had just very simple emotions that somebody could have chronically. For example, anger. And next to it, it had a disease that could result, and it said heart disease or high blood pressure. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's interesting. You think about people that are super angry all the time or have tempers, and a lot of times those are the people, not every time, but you hear about people having heart attacks and things like that. And it's like, oh, or sadness. If you're sad enough, you get chronic depression, right? Like all these things really do make sense. We're just brought so far away from it. And we're not taught to like look inside, like you said, it's just, oh, what pill can fix this right away? Or what substance can I take to just drown it out, And we don't really take into consideration and just, like you said, put it on a whiteboard and just say, all right, what is this? Where's it coming from? How is it serving me? Is it serving me? Do I need to keep it? Do I need to let it go? Do I need to heal it? What do I need to do with it? But we're just all so like just not educated on how to do this, and we're so dependent on saviors. I have to go to the doctor right away, and it makes me think about how many people have passed or who have chronic illnesses that they're dealing with and just are so ignorant to the fact that it could potentially be something that they could just heal, like you said, it's not quick, but if they spent some time going inside, if that could go away for them, or if they switch their belief on something. And I love
Yeah.
that example that you gave about, somebody that gets a diagnosis, for example, like what their belief system is about it could possibly, alter the outcome of what the healing process is for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's an element of choice, so like I used to have really bad anger on the road. They call it road rage. So I would be driving, and my pet peeve is somebody who's driving slowly in the left lane, which is for passing, right? And
Me too, girl.
and so I would come up behind them, and then they wouldn't move, and just the rage would rise in me, and I would think, you stupid, insert word there, and I would just become like in a big anger tizzy. And then, first of all, the process I do, I thought, okay, why? Why am I so angry? Oh, and then it was injustice. You're thwarting me. You're blocking me. You're not letting me do you're interfering. You're being bad. You're not following the rules. It was all trauma related stuff. So that was one phase. And then it occurred to me, okay, so I'm driving somewhere. I'm having a terrible experience because of that versus I could just let it go and think, well, they're either oblivious or maybe their mom died yesterday or maybe whatever. They're old. That's happened to me where I've been behind someone honking and then drove by them and they're like 100 years old. I felt like it's such a
Oh,
jerk. But versus what if I was driving and I didn't have that anger and I could look at the beautiful scenery around me, the trees or the sky, and actually have a positive experience. So I've worked my way to the fact that now that doesn't trigger me. And when I'm kind of blocked and I can't pass, I just breathe and I look at the scenery and I enjoy the clouds and the sunshine. I'm like, I'm not going to why am I stressing myself out? And there's not even a reason I have to be somewhere. Like, it's not like anything will happen if I'm 5 minutes later. So therein, there's a choice. So we make ourselves suffer a lot.
absolutely. Yes, you're so right about that. Another thing I wanted to bring up too that I love that you talked about was how words are spells. And you gave some really good examples, but it brought up a memory that I actually totally forgot about when I used to work at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas. I worked on a gym that was on site there. And one of the things that we did was we went to different airlines and we tried to figure out how to mitigate injuries with airport staff because there is so many millions of dollars in insurance that go into people like hurting their back, picking up luggage, employees that work for the airport. And one of the things that we discovered that was really interesting was how the unconscious mind doesn't process negative words. So for example, in almost every airport terminal where airport workers are working, it'll say, um, don't fall. They have that in specific areas, like as a reminder. Well, they found in these airports that when somebody would, or when an airline would put "don't fall," they would have more falls. It was like the
Oh,
unconscious mind was just reading "fall," where
yeah,
when the airlines that would have something like "don't forget to take a step," or they would word it without a negative, there were less
right.
injuries. And I was like, that is so fascinating. Like that's something that I never even thought of. But you even think about little stuff like that, right? You're telling a kid, don't jump on the bed. And the kid does it anyways. And it's like, well, you're using a spell on them. Like you're telling them basically that like their unconscious mind here is jump on the bed. And so there's so many different ways that like words are used to sort of weaponize us and like we don't consider how they're broken up, how like what makes up the word. Like whenever you told me that about Google, you just blew my mind, by the way. I never would have even thought about that. But it's like stuff like that, like it impacts us and we don't notice it, and we're constantly like saying these words to ourselves, we're telling ourselves certain things, and how you were saying like how we talk to ourselves, it's like we'd never talk to a best friend or somebody we love like how we talk to ourselves a lot of times. And when you look at those pictures of that water that froze, oh my gosh, like if we're made of however percent, 75%, 80%, whatever it is, water, oh my gosh, like it makes you take a step back and be like, what spells am I putting on myself? Like, do I have those evil molecules in my body where like the water in my body is like, it looks sinister? Or like, do I have these like beautiful particles of water floating around my body that like feel love and like are being nurtured, and there's just like so much that like begs to be explored in sort of the spiritual realm of the healing aspect too, and just, the stuff that we don't physically see, how it's impacting us.
Yeah, and you can have a choice about what your water molecules look like. And to what you were saying before, it's kind of like, the universe doesn't hear the negative. It's like somebody saying, I don't want war. Better to say, I want peace, right? Because when you say that, when you're saying that you don't want war, you're indicating that there's something lacking, that there's no peace, right? But when you focus on peace, it's a positive thing. So there's so many layers to that. And there's so many good books, which now, of course, I can't remember the title to recommend them, but maybe later I'll think of it. It's super important. Everything, they spell us with everything, so it's super important to be aware. It's just awareness. Awareness helps everything. If you, like when my daughter was little and, I would very limited let her watch like certain things, little movies or whatever. And when there would be advertisements, this is everywhere. So you have to teach your kids to analyze this. So I would say, like, there was an advertisement once for Coca-Cola, and it was some young people in a red convertible and, all this stuff. And I told her, like, what are they saying? And she's like, well, if you drink a Coke, then you'll be popular and have a red convertible and have the girls, you know? And I was like, exactly. And I'm like, does that make sense? And she's like, no. If you drink a Coke, that doesn't, and I was like, so teach yourself and your kids like how to analyze these things, because everything out there is to manipulate us, in one way or another. So no, absolutely. I think that's really important. And don't put yourself in a box. Like I literally got in a lot of trouble when I was working in the San Francisco jail for a few years. And I got into this fight with a psychiatrist because I was seeing this young man, and he was diagnosed as bipolar and given meds. And as soon as I started talking to him, nope, he was a trauma survivor, sexual abuse survivor. And I said I was supposed to always put the diagnosis in, and I refused to do it. So I got into a screaming match. But people believe what you tell them they are. And you're not a diagnosis. You're not a disease. You're not a mental illness. You're a human being, a divine soul in a human body. Yeah, you may have issues, but you are not those issues. And it's so important what we believe about ourselves. And like you said earlier, if we believe, so people say, oh my God, the cabal's doing all these things, fear porn, fear porn. Yeah, they are doing all these things, but guess what? Who are we? We're more powerful than them. So you can't go down that, oh, I'm a victim and they're, and I'm disempowered. It's that disempowerment that was built into us to keep us from rising up and changing this reality.
100%. Yes. And even going into the parenting part, like how you were talking about, where there's like a deliberate separation of like a child's natural attachment tendencies of how it interacts and needs to interact with a parent, It is really sad. I had a friend recently who gave birth and took a maternity leave, and like literally right at like a 3-month mark, put her brand new baby into daycare to go back to work. And I was like, oh my gosh, like where have we gotten to in society? We're like, that's just what you do right away, And I know the world has gotten so expensive, like they've really made it hard a lot of times for parents to have one person at home and one person working. And I totally understand that. But it's so different. Like my mom raised 4 kids all alone at home. We didn't have like babysitters very often. And and so did her mom. And you look at like how far we've gotten away from that. Like you said, the second we can now, we're like, who wants to watch my kid? Like, what government agency can I pass my child off to so I can go work and make the government taxes? It's so wild, like how far we've even as adults, like disconnected from our natural, like maternal and paternal instincts with children.
Yeah. And I think if some ET race was or is like watching us, and that what you just said, they would be like, oh my God, they don't value their children. And then we wonder why children have all these issues, and they have supposedly ADHD, which is a made up thing, for the pharma industry, but why are kids so stressed out and so hopeless? And so, well, they're not, it's bringing a being into this world is a huge gift and responsibility. And if you want a different future for the human race, we have to start valuing our children. And, to what you speak of back in the, I don't know when it changed, maybe the 40s, maybe the 50s, a man could make enough money to buy a home, a car, pay all the bills, and support an entire family, right? And they've changed that. So both parents have to go to work. And that's to break that attachment. That's to change who we are fundamentally. And, I quit working when I had my daughter, and I only started working part-time when she was 16. And I was prey to that feminist movement for a while. I believed all that. I was just like, I'm never gonna get married and I'm never gonna, have a home and have a child. And then I got pregnant accidentally and it all happened to me. And it was such a powerful experience. I will never regret spending that time with my daughter. She is a confident, happy, intelligent, good human being in the world. She has the attachment. Sometimes I watch it and I'm like, I didn't have that experience. So it's just like, she's good. And what is more important than putting a stable, compassionate, intelligent human being on this planet? Because the children are the future, right? Which is why they're trying to destroy them. And, I don't want to sound old fashioned, but I've been through all the programs, the feminist, the new age, the this, the that. And, I've circled back. I'm going to be 60 in a couple of months. And I can tell you, I think that children deserve to have one parent raise them and be with them. It's not fair to not give them that. And so I'm glad for the choice I made, and at risk of sounding whatever, I'm just going to say that. I think it's a tragedy and a travesty, and it's all supported by the cabal and the societal things that we go through. But this is really, really wrong, and we have to rethink this.
I completely agree. And I love that there's people like you out here now putting presentations together and workshops and resources and getting people together collectively to come together to talk about this because like you said, it's the total opposite. Like everywhere you look, there's organized cabal systems coming at us, like pushing these agendas heavy everywhere we look. And I fell prey to a lot of this stuff too. It's hard not to when it's just always there, when your friends are going through it, and they phrase and they just like how you were saying with the Hegelian dialect, like they create this like fear in you to where as soon as they offer a solution, all of a sudden you feel like very empowered and like safe again. It's so abusive. And so part of like accepting these agendas like makes you feel really good at the time when you don't understand that it's not for the benefit of humanity or for children or even for yourself. It's really sad how easily manipulated we can be under those times of duress and fear, and they know that from the things that they put you through and using it globally in a more, sophisticated way to reach more and more people without even having to touch them. It's really scary that we got here. And so I wanted to give you time. You have an amazing website, you have a podcast, and this is like really like your thing. Like you are so settling into this like beautiful place of like healing, of helping people recognize what trauma is, helping them get through it, explaining the problem, giving them the right solution without fear. Like you're like inverting the Hegelian dialect and like taking it back and being like, we're going to get rid of this, we're going to get to the truth and then how to solve it. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your business and your podcast and the resources that you have and anything that you would like people to know on how they can support you.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't go through everything I went through to curl up in a corner and, suck my thumb and rock. No, I'm going to do everything in my power to expose the real thing that's going on this planet and to offer people solutions and ways that they can heal and recover and step into their power. And I'm an ever evolving project of myself. I grow, I learn more. So with Unbroken.Global is where you can find me, and actually my Oh yeah, that's the page where, there's now many interviews of me. And then I have interviewed many, many people, um, whistleblowers, people who expose the system, healers, teachers, because I'm so thrilled that there's so many of us out there doing our little part to help change the world. And I value the relationships. I now have this community of incredible people that I've met. And so when I did the summit, I brought some of them together, to talk. And this is a goal of mine to work together with other people. But you can watch, I have over 100 interviews now on all kinds of topics. I actually interviewed in terms of survivors, not just SRA survivors, but people who have survived other things, like a young woman who survived transitioning from female to male and then went back. And so this is just ways that, and I've been told by people that when they watch my content, it helps them wake up, it helps them, understand the reality out there and themselves. So what I am working on now is a class on trauma and recovery, which will go much deeper than, the presentation. And I hope can help not only people who have been traumatized, but people who are working with trauma survivors. And I myself am a therapist. So if you go to my services page, I do counseling with people. I also do what's called ascension coaching, which is just like many people have come to me because they're waking up, and waking up can be traumatic, and sort of to get some guidance and, talk about like what they're coming into awareness of. I am going to be doing some more groups, like classes, psychoeducational stuff for survivors, because I think there's a variety of like learning about tools and skills and tips and things like that. So that's coming. And generally, I'm guided by my higher self, by God, to do what's next. I definitely want to write a book or several books. So there's a lot of projects coming. I think education is important, knowledge is important, and knowing how to heal is important. So, and I just started a Substack, Emma, because I have articles on my website, but I think they'd be better on a Substack. I love to write, so I'm going to be doing a little more with that. I'm not very tech savvy, so I haven't figured out how to put the articles I have on the Substack. But maybe if you have time, you can show me how to do that.
Yes.
But yeah, so there's a variety of things in the works. And then there's the membership. So one thing that I've heard a lot of people say is, and this was my experience too, it's like, it's very isolating to be in this reality now. There's kind of a split. It's like, it's never been this stark before, where we're on the same planet, but we're literally living in two different realities. Like there's the normies, or the people that are in the matrix, and then there's the ones that wake up, and it's hard now to communicate, and there's a lot of tension, and so people feel very alone. And so I wanted to create a community. And so if you become a member, we have a Zoom once a month, and it's just started a few months ago, but every month there's more and more people. And it's a great opportunity to get together and to be around other people that are waking up, that are awake, to talk about things. There's a lot of survivors in that group as well. And so, and if you become a member, you also, it's not very much, but you support me. The more members I have, I do, I do all of the interviews and all of that free of charge. So, if you want to help me, then become a member, and we get together, and that's growing and expanding too. So I think from those meetings, those group monthly meetings, we're going to begin to work together and create communities, because we need to begin to create the new reality that we want, to create, to empower ourselves and come together and live in a different way. So, so yeah, if people want to become members, that would be amazing. And yeah, as far as I can think right now, that's kind of it.
Wow. And I absolutely love your podcast. And for people listening, she's had some guests on her show that have been on the imagination. So you guys will see some familiar faces on there also. But you have put a lot of work into creating a lot of free content for us, and I want you to keep doing that. And there's always, people that have issues sometimes. I get it sometimes when survivors have a book out and they're like, oh, they're trying to make money. And I'm like, why? Like,
Uh,
yes, like we want them to make money. Like, I want you all to make money so you don't have to work a regular job, so you can spend all your time doing this. Like, we're all still humans. We have bills we have to pay, and this is like a lot of time. And on the other hand, there's so many more people now who are so receptive to it and who are just wanting so much to like be in a community, to get help, and to have some type of exclusivity where it's maybe not private, or excuse me, public. A lot of public platforms exist, but not everybody's in a place right now where they're comfortable or even able to go, just put everything out, or to even know where to start to ask questions. So it's so valuable that you are giving us your time and that people can pay such a cheap price monthly or yearly and get access to you to be able to, I saw in some of the memberships, it's they get personal time with you so they can have a question that they ask you that nobody else sees and
yes,
they get an individualized answer. And I think that's so wonderful that you're offering this because you're really bringing people together, and that's exactly what they don't want. Like you said, they don't want us forming
yeah,
communities. They don't want us resourcing each other. They want us all making money off the government or working for somebody, that we don't want to. When we should all be coming together and saying, how can I help you do what you want to do? How can I help you grow? How can you help me grow? It's a team effort doing this. And so, like,
yeah.
I really love that you're offering that. And, like, I encourage everybody to please go check that out, especially if people, a lot of people that listen to my podcast do so because they feel part of a community, because they feel accepted here, they feel around like-minded people, and now there's other creators out there creating other avenues and other spaces where people can come together. You're with like-minded, vetted people. And a lot of times too, I really like services where you do pay to be a part of something because you know that you're not getting the riffraff in there. You know that the people that are paying are actually there because they want to be and they're committed to it, and you don't have sort of like the infiltrators that are going to go that route. So I
Yeah.
love so much that you're doing that, Max, and I can't thank you enough. You do so much for free. You do all these podcasts, you create all this content, and I love now that you're creating a business out of this with your summits that you're doing. Do you have another one coming up, by the way, at all that you know of?
Um, yeah, one's in the works. The other thing, that I've always wanted to do is to create and start small, but to create a trauma recovery center, a place where, you know, these trafficked kids, when they're rescued, can go to heal, or where people who are escaping the cult can go and get medical healing and psychological healing and all of that. And so if there's anyone out there who has a lot of money and wants to put it towards a good cause, I have a business plan that I'm putting up. I would love to get funding to be able to help people for free of charge. And I have gotten, it's really, there's always trolls. So I've gotten that criticism like, what, you charge? And it's like, well, I mean, do you
Yes.
work for free? Like, I don't get freebie. It's like, well, I'm a survivor. Well, I'm a survivor too. No one gives me free rent or free anything. Like, and I spent a lot of years in education, a lot of years working on myself. And it's a shame that people want to troll with that. But look, if somebody has a lot of money and wants to put it to some good cause, I would love to create these centers, and I would love to have, I actually do see a few people for free or virtually nothing. And if people want to start like a pay it forward fund, I can start something like that. If people want to contact me and want to help to pay for therapy for survivors, to make it very, very low fee, I would love that. Okay, I would love to do, in a perfect world, we could just give and then be supported and have everything we need. And when we're working towards that world, but we're not there yet.
Right, 100%. Yes. And you're so right about that. Like we need to create avenues where people can pay their bills and not be put in a position to where they're suffering again. Like how you said, like this presentation that you put together, this is like a culmination of all the years that you spent healing, paying for services, trying different things. Therapy is not cheap, you know? And so we're getting the fruits of your labor, and people have problem paying for it. It's so ridiculous, you know? And it's like, what do you think? Like she's just like picking like read an encyclopedia and put some random things together, and like, no, like this is your experience. This is decades of learnings that we get to learn in just a couple hours here from you. You know, it's
Yeah,
incredible. So I love that. I love that there's more communities. Everybody asks, what can I do to help? That's the biggest question that I get. What can I do to help? What can I do to help? Well, go support Max. Instead of giving your $10 to Starbucks, you know, on a day to buy a Frappuccino, go buy a membership and join a community where you get tons of value, you get healing, you get community, you get to work with a professional. Like there's so many ways that like we don't realize that like we're feeding another machine with what we pay for, whether it's our financial money or our attention, you know, and like my
yeah,
answer to them is always go ask a survivor. Like stop asking like what can you do? Like you have tons of people out there saying I need help, I want help, like I'm offering this, I have a book, I have a service. Go support them. You know, it's really that simple these days, and there's so many more people that are offering stuff. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Max. You're a phenomenal human. You are just so beautiful, radiant. Your frequency is just off the charts. You're a walking love bubble. And I can't wait to see what you continue to do, because I know that even though you're doing so much right now, I feel like you're just dipping your toe in the water, and that there's just this massive explosion of opportunities that are both going to be presented to you, and then also available to others through you. So I thank you so much for coming on and for sharing. That presentation blew my mind. It was amazing. And like I said, I could probably talk to you for like another 10 hours about it.
yeah.
But was there anything else today that we didn't cover that you wanted to say?
Just, know that we're transitioning from a dark age to a light age. Hold the light, hold your frequency, heal yourself, lend a hand to others, live a moral life, because that's what is changing things. So have heart, it's not the end of our world, it's the end of their world. Keep that in your mind, because that's a frequency that will take us forward. And we've got to all work together. And like you alluded to, there's people that like to criticize, people that are trying to do something. Instead of criticizing, do something that you can do, because we are moving into a beautiful new earth for all of us. So that's I want to leave us with that.
Beautiful thought. And for people listening, I'll have all Max's info in the show notes as usual. So just a click away, it always lights up as a hyperlink, whether you're on iTunes or Spotify, YouTube, BitChute, wherever you're at, just go in the show notes. It'll light up. I'll have Max's website there, and you guys can go leaf through all of her resources, her blog. I'll put your Substack too. I didn't know you started one, so I'll link that and help you with it. And I'm really excited that you're getting into that. So I'll have that below too for you guys to go check out. I'll have all my links below. Please connect, you guys. It's always hard to knowing, you know, what platforms we'll be up on and not. So try to support us however you can. And I'm so grateful for you guys. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you guys so much for listening. God bless you, and we will see you next time.